Hey guys, it's so good to see you. Today I want to show you how to paint the subtle fur texture, velvety ears, and expressive eyes on this Walker Coon Hound puppy. I've included a list of supplies in the description below this video, so let's dive in. I'm starting with the wet and wet technique. Using clean water on my size 8 Escoda round brush, I'm just scrubbing the water gently all over the belly part of the little puppy, and just staying within my pencil lines. Since this is a short fur dog, we don't have to worry too much about having a lot of fuzzy fur in the image. Now I'm taking a very watered down indigo and starting to gently suggest some shadow shapes underneath the muzzle and on the belly, using the wet and wet technique. Because our paper and our paint are so wet, they are blending out and blooming and spreading out on the paper very naturally. You'll notice there's a little bit of a brown tint in there, and I've introduced some burnt umber into the mixture. And here around the ear, I'm starting to use more of a rich burnt umber to indicate the shadow shapes under the ear. The markings on the dog's back are more of a dark brown, so I'm using my burnt sienna and burnt umber and indigo in combination to create a nice rich dark brown for the back markings on the dog. You'll notice I'm using a lot of wet, juicy paint, and I'm not being too concerned about lots of detail here. Since this isn't the focal point, it doesn't have to be crazy detailed. If little blooms form along the edge, you can take a clean, damp brush and wipe those out. Now that the belly is dry, I can go back in wet on dry and paint some more details across the top of the belly. I'm using a nice light gray, which is a combination of indigo and burnt umber. And then I'm also just adding a couple more small shadow shapes here and there to help outline the details on the body. Now for the ears. I'm taking clean water again and painting inside of the left ear, and then just dropping in some watered down burnt umber. Once again, you'll see it's blooming and spreading evenly across the surface of the paper. This is a great way to get really smooth washes on your paper. Of course, this does work best when you use high quality cotton watercolor paper, so I definitely recommend doing that. I'm using some more burnt umber and spreading it across the top of the head, just starting to color in the whole shape of the brown inside of the dog's head. I've colored in that right ear now, and while it's still wet, I'm going in with a darker wash of burnt umber. Above the eyes, there are a lot of different little shadow shapes. I'm using some more indigo in my mixture to create a black, and that's what I'm using to paint the dark shadow shapes around the ears and under the eyes. Still just sticking with my size 8 round brush, you can get a lot of detail even with a larger brush like this. And just gradually boosting my mid-tone values, one wash over the top of another. You do want to make sure when you add a layer over the top, such as this one on the ear, that the layer underneath is completely dry before you go over it again with another layer. That way you won't disrupt the paint or cause any kind of unevenness on the surface. So you can see I've covered it with another wash of indigo and burnt umber. I'm doing the same thing now on the right side since it's already dry, and just covering it with another layer of color. Layering is one of my favorite methods of building up color and value in a watercolor painting. I'm filling in the shadow shape using indigo all along the sides of the heads, and I've switched to a smaller brush. This is my Silver Black Velvet size 4 round brush. And this is helping me get in some smaller details. I'm using short, quick brush strokes to create a little bit of fur texture on the body now that the body is completely dry, and adding another light layer across the white of the belly. Underneath the muzzle, I want to make sure it looks separated and like it's coming forward from the body, so I'm using a little bit of a light wash to make the head look like it's coming forward with that shadow shape underneath. And then I'm using yellow ochre on the head and some more burnt sienna, and using short, quick brush strokes to create texture while I add these washes as a second or third layer across the head. Throwing in a little bit of green. It's amazing how many different colors you can see in your reference photo. Now around the eyes, I'm using a circular motion with my brush, imitating the direction that I see the fur growing around those eyes. You always want to move your brush in the direction that you see the fur growing when you're painting fur, and this will help it look a lot more realistic and natural. Using a really dark burnt umber and burnt sienna combination, I'm painting in those little shadow shapes around the eye sockets. This is helping the eyes look like they're standing forward in the skull, but you'll notice I'm missing certain areas of the paper, leaving little highlights in between the color, and that's helping it look really soft and furry. You definitely want to use a smaller brush and slow down when you're working around little details like the eyes. I've splayed the bristles of my brush, and this is helping me make even smaller detailed fur texture on the surface of the paper, intensifying the shadow shapes with my indigo and adding little creases in the ears. And continuing to build up the layers using burnt sienna, all on the surface of the paper, layer over layer. For the eyes, I'm using indigo, and I like to outline my pencil markings first just to reaffirm my drawing. And I start with the darkest black color, which is again a combination of indigo and burnt umber. And I'm filling in the eye, just avoiding a circular highlight shape. It's still too light, but I'll go back over it darker with another layer soon. And I like to make the eyes feel merged to the head by adding fur texture and deep dark shadow shapes all around the eyes, and that helps them feel like they're a part of the setting and not just pasted on. And I'm continuing to add more layers of fur detail over the top, going darker and darker in value and more detailed, wet on dry. Now that the eye is dry, I can go even darker with more black and continue to add details to the eyes. A little more burnt umber and burnt sienna. I need to make the cheeks a little bit darker, so I'm adding another layer here. If you want your washes to look less detailed, you can use more water and use the belly side of your brush to produce broader, softer wash all across the surface. Now for the muzzle, I'm using indigo and those short, quick brush strokes, making the muzzle look really scrubby and soft. And for the nose, I'm starting by outlining the nostrils. And while I have that light gray in my brush, I'm adding a little bit of fur detail along the edge of the white marking and darkening up those creases in the ears using indigo and adding another wash of burnt umber. The right cheek needs to go a little bit darker in the shadows, so once again I'm continuing to add more layers using burnt umber and indigo. Constantly be checking your reference photo, comparing your values to the ones you see there. If it's not dark enough, just continue to add more layers. But again, always make sure the layers underneath are dry before going over the top of them with another layer. I'm painting the right eye, being sure to avoid some of the whites of the eyes, and adding more fur texture all around the eyes. Still splaying the bristles of my brush. This is one of my favorite techniques for fur. And if you're interested in learning more about how I paint fur in watercolor, check out this video. I'm now adding some more burnt sienna, continuing to layer in those dark shapes in the head, darkening up the whites of the eyes, which of course are never true white. Usually they're more of a gray since they are in shadow. And then I'm using some really watered down paint for the little spots and markings right above the nose. Now the nose has a bluish tint to it, so I've grabbed some phthalo blue and I've put a really light wash of that across the nose. Continuing to scrub on little circular shapes around the muzzle, suggesting those little spots. And I don't want them to look like they're just pasted on, so I'm using a scrubbing motion with my brush so it looks soft and fuzzy and textured. With my indigo burnt umber combination, highly pigmented, not very much water, I'm painting on the dark black shapes on the nose. With most dogs, you'll see a little bit of light catching on the rims of the nostrils, so you can see I've left those highlighted. And I'm just leaving certain areas on the top of the nose that are also in the light. And this is making it look really 3D and realistic. The right ear is still not quite finished, so we're adding another layer of watered down burnt umber, incorporating some more of that texture and missing certain areas of the paper that's still dry so that we see some highlights in there. You can take your wet paint and just kind of pull it out in these short, quick brush strokes and vary the colors so it doesn't look like just a flat wash all in one color. For the whiskers, I've got some white gouache and a tiny little squirrel brush, and I'm painting those on using curving, quick, swooping motions with the brush. I love adding whiskers. It's like icing on the cake, that fun last detail. And there is our finished Coon Hound painting.
I hope you enjoyed this video. If it was helpful, please give it a thumbs up. That really helps me out as a creator so that I can continue to make high quality free content like this for you guys. And subscribe if you're new here so you never miss any new videos. Thanks for watching.